I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark.
Hi, welcome to GM Tools, Modding the Rules.
Today we're going to tell you all about modding the rules, whether it's via the official mods that are in Game Mastery Guide or ways that we've modded games before in the past. You can ask your questions about ways that you've wanted to mod the rules. Tell some stories about times that you've modded the rules. It's all about a celebration of modding the rules. Because what is game design if not just modding the rules, but then having that be in the official book?
Yep.
Right? So...
well, making the rules in the first place. Like
that's
the
true.
Fundamentals of the system.
That is sort of... but that's also sort of modding starting from whatever you do have to start from somewhere.
Yeah.
But you're always tinkering and modding and messing around in the game. So anyone here who has made modifications to the game, made some house rules, made some changes, and gotten like the results you wanted, like, oh, this house rule is to do this, and it did do that, hey, you're a game designer, even if you're not a published game designer. Maybe if you made a house rule and it had major unintended consequences and didn't do what you wanted, I guess you're still a game designer, but you may need a little bit of work. But Pathfinder 2nd Edition, one of the great things about it is it was created to try to make it easier for you to be able to mod the rules and have everyone be game designers, have groups work together to make decisions about how you want to play, how much complexity do you want, what sorts of difficulty toggles do you want, and how you want different expressions in parts of the game to play. So
shall we start with the variants described in Game Mastery Guide and then move on to some other things?
I guess so. Although there is already, and you should check it out, a Paizo Friday where Eleanor and I talk about what the official variants are in the Game Mastery Guide, and we go through them blow by blow, one by one, and explain them all with like behind the scenes commentary from me about how it was made, and some commentary from Eleanor about some of the ways her groups have modded the games in the past.
I see, you've already done that.
I've already done that, and people may have seen it already. I'm definitely happy to go into any of those variant sections that people in chat want to talk more about. And we can briefly say that the variants that are in the Game Mastery Guide, if you haven't checked that one out and you're here now and you don't want to go check it out and then come back, they encompass ability score variants, which include total point buy, gradual ability boosts that don't all come at every multiple 5s, and alternative ability scores. Alignment variants for removing alignment, making different kinds of replacements. Deep backgrounds that are super complicated, involve random rolls, and sometimes give you things that shouldn't really be available in a normal background because you have to roll for it and it's pretty unlikely. Dual class PCs who have 2 classes at once. Characters with a free archetype. Characters with many more ancestry options, or characters with fewer ancestry options or fewer skill feats, because some people get overwhelmed by the choices. I know if you're watching this show, you might be like, well, I want as many choices as possible. I like making more choices, but some people, the amount we have is too many. Some it's just right, and you can take the amount that you want. Level 0 characters if you want to start before level 1. An automatic bonus progression if you, like me, kind of would rather just not have the +1, +3 on items, but we checked it out, and most of you probably don't agree with that, because vast majority of people wanted to keep them around, but not go up to 5, is what we found out during the playtest. 5 was just way too much of a swing between someone who had the item or didn't, so 3 it is. With the automatic bonus progression, you don't have to have that swing at all, you just get the bonuses you need, or make them from high quality items. Proficiency without level kind of gives a more bounded style of play where a bunch of low-level brigands are still much more of a threat to a PC who's much higher level than them, and a PC group might just take down a monster that's 7 levels higher than them if they get lucky, which that is, you'd have to get very lucky or be very perfect if you want to do that in the regular system. Skill points, for if you want to get a little more nitty gritty on how you assign them. Stamina, Starfinder style, which is pretty cool, and those are the ones that we have. In brief, let's see. So Numbat says, what are some of the issues you have tried to address with rules changes?
So does this mean like when we've come up with our own house rules to games?
I was going to ask that too. Yeah, so you mean with house rules in Pathfinder 1st Edition, or we'll let Numbat answer that. Joe Junger says decision paralysis, and it's probably talking about the reason why groups sometimes want fewer options, like the simplified ancestries or simplified skill feats.
Yes, with house rules in any system. Alright, yeah, that's a pretty broad question, but certainly one that we would expect to field during this episode.
So, I would say one of the house rules that was most important to our home group, I was the GM, but just to the players, to everybody in Pathfinder 1st Edition, was one that we made about death and dying.
Yes.
So, in Pathfinder 1st Edition, first of all, you probably died anyway at higher levels because you took so much damage that the amount of difference between your hit points and your negative con was small enough that it's very unlikely you fall into that. But even when you didn't, by the default Pathfinder 1st Edition death and dying rules, it's super easy to just smack someone on the ground and kill them. And if you don't, they come back with absolutely no penalty right away. So, because of the fact that my group wanted to sort of not have that be the dominant tactic, to be able to say, hey, yeah, we've knocked these NPCs out. That means they're out. They can't just get a healer to cast a heal spell on them, and now we have to deal with them, and we should have killed them instead of taking hostages. Because they like to be friendlier. And vice versa, to make it so that I didn't just go down and kill their people, because they always bring healing in my home group a lot.
Yeah.
We just made a house rule where it took a minute to wake up after you've been healed above 1 hit point. And that sort of was like, okay, we took that guy down. They're out of the fight. They can be healed. In fact, sometimes the pieces would heal their enemies to make sure they didn't die.
Yeah.
Or like intentionally include them in a channel, but they wouldn't wake up.
You'd also be staggered for longer than just like.
Yes, we also used not a unique house rule of ours, but we used I think it was originally from Monty Cook's Arcana Unearthed, the one where you go staggered into negative con modifier, so that there's more of a chance of that epic, I'm almost down, but I can do some more actions. And then in 3.5, we used what was also on Arcana Unearthed, but did get picked up in Pathfinder, whereas the staggered window didn't, which is dying at negative con instead of negative 10.
Yes.
Both of which were originally from Arcana Unearthed. Pathfinder picked up the latter part for Pathfinder 1st Edition, did not pick up the former about the negative con window, but we just kind of, it increases that chance, because out of 100 hit points, to get to exactly 0, the chances are almost nothing. But it's so cinematic when you're like, I barely clung on. Let me cast that last fireball or the one heal spell to get myself back. So
yeah, and we did there are some things that ended up being more that are actually in 2nd edition that we'd sometimes use, like secret checks.
Yes. I mean, even in Pathfinder Society, in some scenarios in Pathfinder 1st Edition, it told the GM to do secret checks. Haunting of Hinojai, for instance, specifically instructed the GM to do that. But we did it more often, and even when we didn't, even when people saw their roles, we definitely did. I mean, 1st Edition Pathfinder had critical failures on some of its skills. They just didn't call them that, like climb and disable device did. But we definitely added in, like, the interesting misinterpretation on really, really low knowledge checks. And even though it wasn't rolled secretly, the player would roll it, and they would just role play it out with complete conviction of, like, no, it's definitely this.
Yeah. We also...
That was a house rule.
We also had house rules when it came to magic item creation in 1st Edition, so that you didn't just automatically succeed to create magic items and multiply your wealth by a lot, so there was a chance that the magic item might not work, and there was also a chance that it might wind up being cursed.
Yes, to put cursed items in there. No one was really super... I mean, they liked the result, but they weren't super happy with the gamble of it. So, as soon as dynamic item creation was written, I guess that was passive voice. As soon as I wrote it for Unchained, definitely with some help from then editor Ryan Macklin, went through and did a lot of... gave me a lot of edit questions that helped refine it. But we've started using that in our first edition game that we're still playing of Iron Fang Invasion for that whole game, and I think the group likes it a lot better. It just makes it more fun, but also keeps wealth from getting out of control, because 3.5 D&D, it was, you get it half price for gold, but you pay enough XP that actually the XP makes it more like 75%, because 3.5 had a XP to gold conversion ratio, and it turns out the amount the XP was worth was about 25% more. Pathfinder just removed that XP cost and counterbalanced it with nothing. So it caused the economy of the 3.5 magic item, which was already one of the best possible choices for 75%, to get even more out of whack. And our group, basically, the failure chance or chance to make it cursed counteracted that 25%. In a way that was never completely satisfying.
We also did, I mean, that was one that we definitely moved away from when we had something.
Yeah.
We had
but
something
we
better
definitely did it, and
it was definitely preferred over not having stuff.
Made Kingmaker go out of control with wealth.
I guess there was also the we also did some things that were sort of like quasi-access stuff, where we would say that like we would say that like, you know, things from a few of the Coraline hardcover RPG books were basically are uncommon, and then things from other books are rare. So to say where it was a lot where the things from the core rulebook you could just kind of assume, and some other things that were just kind of made sense in the area you could assume that you would find, then the things from these other books like you could find if you look for them for a little while, and they'd be more expensive than things from. So we kind of had this 3 tiers of rarity. Going on
a lot of groups did that.
Yeah.
On their own, but some groups wanted to but just gave up because it's a lot of work to chronicle which ones were which, and you had to paint with a broad brush if you did book by book, even though there were a few things in later books that you might want to be more common or uncommon, and then they weren't really defined, so we had to just know what we meant.
We had to know what we meant, but I mean, like I had house rules in terms of like the research time and costs and things like that based on the effective rarity
and
of the items that I
magic
used.
Item generator for a market that you made that was based on rarity had a small chance to give you a rare item every once in a while.
So I did a thing where it was like 10% of all items will be from a category that it will be from the categories that are not the super common ones, and there's like a 1 in 100 chance, and 1 in 100 of them will be from the rare ones and stuff like that. And so it definitely took longer to
There's
generate.
A giant spreadsheet.
There were many giant spreadsheets.
Also, in terms of subsystems, our group pretty much rarely ran into one that we didn't house rule.
Yeah.
Linda's spreadsheet for the kingdom building rules that combined the original rules, Legendary Games' additions, and her own stuff was like legendarily convoluted and would like build the cities and settlements for you when you inputted certain things, and then use that to calculate. Those pages calculated everything for the kingdom overall, and Linda rewrote.
And there were things where it's like if you had population, like the higher the population, there were other factors where it was like the higher the population got and the higher the relative to the space, then the harder the control would get, and then there were certain things like more land made certain things harder, more people made certain things harder, and you had sort of these counterbalancing factors. You also needed more food and resources to support them, and there was a bunch of other fiddly bits.
And you completely revamped the mass combat system.
Yeah.
I replaced caravan combat in Jade Regent, which is famous for the fact that once you get to a certain point in the AP, you automatically lose the caravan combats. And there's no way to build a caravan that can win unless you like keep rolling 20s and the GM keep rolling 1s. I replaced it with a weird Harrow card drawing based system that's sort of like some of those. If you've ever played co-op games where during your turn you do a good thing, but then you have to draw from a deck of bad things that could happen. Except in this case, you were drawing a good future, neutral future, bad future card, and then depending on where cards showed up, you could like get rid of the bad cards if they showed up in the good slot. If the good card showed up in the bad slot, something bad could happen to the character represented by that card, and otherwise the bad card did like a bad special ability.
Yeah, and you also had the relationship system for that game as well.
That's right, and relationships mattered in caravan combat.
Yeah.
Yep. So we definitely we almost never ran a subsystem without modding the subsystem.
Yeah.
But
or like the ship combat in the ship combat for Skull and Shackles.
I think you mostly used a Fire She Bears combo.
I mostly used Fire. I made some variants on the Fire She Bears system from Razor Coast, for that. to kind of sync it up with some of the Pathfinder things in Skull and Shackles a little more. But yeah, I'd say a lot of our changing was there. We don't really have house rules in second edition. More so, sometimes we find something that seems a little funny, and then we ask Mark if maybe that should be eroded, and then sometimes we test it out as the way that people think maybe it should be eroded, so we see how it goes and stuff like that.
People ask like which of the Game Master Guide variants do you use in your home games, and my answer was none, because I want to play the baseline games so that I can see where it's working and where it isn't, and like I'm super excited about a lot of these variants, but if I did an automatic progression, free archetype, alternate ability scores game, I'm going to get a bad sense of the way a normal game works, and sort of like free archetype is an example. Someone's like, that sounds cool, and I think it sounds cool too, but I won't, if I'm looking at an archetype, I would have a bad sense of, as like the design manager, of the value of how much people have to pay for an archetype if I'm used to getting them for free.
Yeah.
And so I might undervalue the feats and not let them do good enough stuff. So that's why I'm playing with baseline for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but especially before becoming a designer here, and in Pathfinder 1st, you kind of had to mod the game to get it to exactly where you wanted it to be because it was very disparate. But I'm just so used to modding completely. That's how I built up my skills as a designer, really. I mean, I have some third-party products that I worked on before coming to Paizo, but I kind of went straight into the deep end on those third-party products. Like, one of the first ones I pitched to any publisher was to Legendary Games, which normally used Paizo freelancers, and it was the complicated relationships and caravan combat system that I made for Jade Regent. So I built up a lot of that skill as a designer just modding the game. Rico says self-restraint on modding the game is a good service for fans.
Well, I think definitely during the definitely I would say that like he still gets to get the modding energy out whenever there's a playtest and you get to try so that we can try out like different variants that you guys have been considering. It's like, hey, we could try this, or does this work better?
Stomp Monkey says GMG was hard to do the Society AR review for. Why? It doesn't have like almost anything that you would have to do an AR review on. Maybe that was the joke.
I think it is.
Okay, I was the straight man for you. So certainly when we had, it was a joke. Certainly when we had like 3.5 games. I had a lot of, like, super variant settings that had tons of modified rules in them. Like, one of my settings, which I was running, like, before Golarion, but it had a place that's, like, pretty similar to Cheliax, and a place that's in between that place and the Southern Kingdoms that's pretty similar to the Mana Wastes. Except that instead of Geb and Dex, it's the Devil people on the south, and then this blasted Demon Moors that was pretty similar to the World Wound, even though those things had not been created. That one had a special rule about magic where humans were incapable of casting magic of their own. So they did not have arcane magic. Divine magic, they could cast, but they needed special relics that were connected to the gods, but many cities were built on immobile or very powerful relics that were just in place. And some people had them to carry along, but they were super rare. And if you do not have them, you do not re-prepare your divine spells until you get near one.
Yes.
Now, Diabolism allowed arcane spellcasting if you wanted to become, if you wanted to follow the route of those people in the Northern Kingdoms. And they also wiped out the elves during a battle, and that created that whole area that's horrible with the demons because they exploded the elven high magic wards around their city, which killed most of the people from the north and screwed them up, and their empire and the elves. But the point is, there were lots of different variants in that setting that very much restricted the magic, although psionics was around, and that was the one that some people had, although it was also rare.
But of course, we were the PCs, so...
The PCs had a lot of psionic characters that were very deeply in on the psionics at that point. Or I had another setting that was post-Arthurian, but still using D20, that had a rule where basically you had like a second set of hit points that was used for quick recovery in a sort of treat wounds style situation. But once you ran out of that, you needed to rest for a really long time because nobody could really heal except sometimes the parties the party had like a priest from Ireland who could heal sometimes, and it was pretty confusing. And nobody really had any magic, mostly. So that one had a ton of house rules as well. But generally, when I'm doing a sort of
and then
more...
the concept of like a magic item in that game was like, holy crap, it's a magic item.
Yeah, like they had a magic dagger that was a +1 dagger, and you could swear an oath on it that would basically give it Bane while you're doing that oath, but also give you a lot of penalties if you don't keep the oath. And that little dagger, like the barbarian wound up taking that dagger one time. It's like, yes, I need the dagger. It's magic.
Yes.
Send the bard liches. All right. So basically, I think when we were trying to do a genre, we might have had a lot of modifications, but really, like, other than changing subsystems, that death and dying and the magic item creation were the big ones that we, oh, and access to I mean, that's not really a house rule. It's just that PF1 is silent about whether or not, like, if, I mean, it implies that there are things that you don't have, because, like, Karzug's spellbook is, like, only Karzug knows this spell, or like, it wouldn't really make sense if suddenly, like, an Adventure Path volume gets printed, then all clerks wake up the next day and have all the spells. But it didn't say that you didn't.
Well, I mean, there was still in terms of, like, what probabilities did I assign and what prices did I assign and that kind of thing. So I still considered it house rule for that reason. Let's see. Question for us from Joker Play. Since we're on the topic, magic can feel a bit arbitrary. Oh, we're going up?
Hold on, I was looking up to see if we missed anything from before. Let's see. Caravan content, liches. Thing the mod most in Kingmaker army rules. Yep. So yeah, the question here is, magic can feel arbitrary. It loses a lot of weight at higher levels. Is the premise of this question.
Yeah.
Settings like Thieves World do a good job at making magic available and common while giving it hefty weight. Any advice on how to make magic weightier in Golarion? Like, hey, this is special, dangerous, and misused, rather than just something you can shake from your sleeve.
Oh,
okay, I see what...
Oh.
So, when you started your premise, I was ready to be like, no way. Magic is definitely really weighty and ridiculous in Golarion, but what you mean is that magic is not like some kind of mysterious, dangerous, powerful force, but is more like, we tried to move towards it in second edition, but in first edition there were literally times, I think, in Adventure where people were like, I'll set my watch for an hour by casting an hour-long spell, where it was just so scientific, it was like drained of all mystery. In PF2 it does say, like, the hour duration is an estimate. You cannot set your watch to the duration of a spell. It's not going to be exactly that long. But
I would say
the loss of mystery, the fact that it just seems so clinical, like you're possibly getting it at a convenience store or something like that, is something that I've heard from people.
Rico mentions start adding the rituals from second edition. I think the general idea, personally, the general idea of wild magic, the idea that magic may not always do exactly what you expect. The idea that there may be like some chance that some other spell pops out that isn't the one that you necessarily wanted. There may be some chance, there may be a sense that a character has a certain amount of, that if you continue to cast your spells over time, the more powerful spells you cast, the more it drains on you, and there's some limitation in that way.
That's right.
Or that, like, you know, you're calling upon these powerful artifacts. I think the idea of having there be some consequences to calling upon this great power, some risk that is involved. And of course, this is something you need to have buy-in for the players too, so they don't just feel like you're like, oh, you're nerfing my character.
It's something I played with in almost all of my settings. So the one I was talking about before, you want to make a deal with devils? Now, they give you some consistent spells, but you just made a deal with devils. And if you want the divine magic, you kind of have to go to this place to get the power of the gods. So
or, you know, you eventually, and when we eventually get this relic, but then we run into these issues where...
Well, you stole it and tried to give it to the demons.
I know, I did steal it and tried to give it to the demons. But if you eventually get a silly deck of many things, messing with my mind. Anyway, that was fun. but the idea that there's, you know, if you have, say, a relic that's what allows you to cast spells, then that's going to draw a lot of attention. A lot of people are going to want that, so that maybe because you have this power, then people are going to be coming after you.
Right. And another one of my homebrew settings that I run with Linda, it's not that the spells go haywire, it's that there is one of the strong themes of the setting is that paths to great power also come with a price and great restrictions in what you can do. So, like, the more Fey magic you have, which is one of the big sources of magic in the setting, the more easily you can be bound to a Geas. The more harder it is for you to lie or break your word. Whereas other kinds of magic each have their own sort of things that sort of constrain you, not because the spell Mage Armor is not going to work when you cast it, but because the very process of being someone in that setting who can cast Mage Armor means something about it.
So the character started off as like they could just say whatever. Then as they started getting a few levels in their class with the Fey magic, then it would be the case that if they said something 3 times in a row, they'd be bound to do it. And then it starts escalating from there, until like it's where it gets harder and harder to say falsehoods. And you're more and more bound by your words and your oath, and you're also drawing a lot more attention from powerful beings that are likely to try to twist your arm into something, or that you're going to be trying to make bigger changes in the world, and doing that may require making certain pacts and balancing what pacts you're going to make, and who are you going to be assisting, and what cost are you going to charge for them on their ascent to power.
And it's something the fighter in that game has really had to struggle with, because in his quest for narrative power among the spellcasters in the group, he kind of went off the deep end from his lawful good, oh, I hate those stupid fairies, and very, very, like, following the primary religious practices of the group, to, like, full-on chaotic, neutral worship of the demons of that setting because of the fact that he found, like, demonic items that granted him powerful magic abilities. And convinced him that the fallen angels / demons were the good guys.
The debates between him, who is like, she's totally telling the truth, and then it's like, dude, that's an artifact of the Demon Lord of Lies, but she's so nice, she's definitely
not. He's also in love with the Demon Lord of Lies.
Yeah, that's a problem.
She's not a demon, he might say.
Yeah,
so it looks like Joker players really like that idea about that it changes you. Fundamentally, it is also cool if magic itself had things in it that were unreliable, but that's really hard to do because you'd have to sort of nitty-gritty go through almost every spell and think of ways that they could do something weird and maybe add an extra check.
Well, I mean, I was thinking that we have some. There's some abilities, even like in first edition, where you can sometimes cast spells of a higher level, but things might be randomized or messed up in some way.
That's true. It's hard though, because those tend to be like very random. It's hard to give that, like, I know what Joker is talking about, which is that sense of, like, it's there and you can usually count on it, but it's not always reliable. In the spells themselves, without rewriting the system, it's hard to do that. But by changing the person themselves, it's easier to put it on that side, I think. Because then you can only have to come up with how it works for at least every class, or set of classes if they're similar.
I could also see something where you have this, where you, like, maybe there's effects based on broad classes of things, like when a divination spell goes haywire, this happens. So there's like a short list of things, and then when you roll, and then it's like you would need to roll a check whenever you're using a spell that's more difficult based on the difficulty of the power of the spell, and then you may have some backlash from the magic.
And it can still be tricky because, like, divination in Pathfinder First Edition has to cover everything from augury to defensive precognition, to give AC bonus, to mind thrust.
Yes.
So you could probably come up with one. Doing it school by school is a way to try it too. Let's see. Joe would say if you implemented that in the game, do it from the start, not tossing the PC in the middle of things. Yeah, like, there's no way I could have just the setting I told you guys about, where it's like, yeah, you don't have arcane magic, you can team up with demons to get something similar. And divine magic means you have to be in a city or you're not getting your spells back. If I just had someone who was a cleric who did not know that at the beginning of the game, like, Linda was Linda's first character ever, other than playing like slightly D&D-ish games with her dad when she
Yeah.
was super little, was a cleric in that setting.
Yes,
if
that's
I had
correct.
just had her play cleric and then partway through been like, psych, you don't get your spells back and you didn't know that was going to happen, that could have been bad for our starting relationship.
Yes,
there.
it would have been bad.
Let's see.
One thing you wanted to see, McFadson's wanted to see for a while, is a class or ancestry designed specifically for 2 players at a time. Like a 2-headed ogre with extra action economy that 2 players pilot, or a proper version of the summoner where the Eidolon is as strong as the PC, like 1st edition LoL that takes up a 2nd player slot.
So sort of a duo combo. Whether it's actually a giant monster or just something that is so intrinsically linked that you need both players and they're each part of the same whole. That's super cool. I know that like Dragon Compendium for 3.0.3.5 had a sort of a character race that was sort of a Gemini that was 2 in 1, but that still wasn't exactly the same. But yeah, you could definitely build something like that. We've certainly had situations in Pathfinder 1st Edition multiple times where somebody using psychic magic or psionics has decided to come reside in the body of somebody else and just come around with them and do their spells. So that 2 people's minds were in the same body.
I think it depends upon how far you want to go with it, because I could see, for example, a pair of characters that have a custom feat chain that allows them to have more interactivity between their characters' various abilities, or I guess the question being like what makes it fundamentally different as a mechanical thing as opposed to like 2 characters that work together very tightly.
And Joker gives an example of, in Thieves' World, a powerful wizard flung a spell at an opponent in a duel. The spell was bounced back. Described magic as a beast once unleashed has a mind of its own, and he became cursed with forced and random shape changing as the weight of the magic. Of like, you don't, and you're saying like, this is what makes you think you don't mess with this lightly. It could do that. There's definitely a lot of possibilities for settings like that.
I could see something where like magic isn't something that maybe like you don't have magic classes in the setting, but you do have magic items and you can try to use them, but it might go terribly wrong. So magic isn't something that you can directly wield.
Right. There's the Iron Heroes setting, which is one that like Mike Merles wrote during the big 3.5 era of making different systems that was almost all combat. And in fact, the initial book was all combat, which is really cool. I played it somewhat with my group, but in one of the games I played, maybe 2 or 3 games, my little brother found like online, I think, or something that they'd added a caster, and it was exactly like you were saying Joker plays with, or at least similar in that magic was weedy, you can't really rely on it. It's the Iron World where most people are the fighter type characters, and there's 10 different types of cool fighters. But my little brother's mage character was in fact so unreliable that like the only things he wound up doing during the fight were he had, I think we only wound up doing 1 encounter, or and then after that, like the player who was wound up being screwed up by this was just like, no, not with your little brother's mage anymore, or whatever the class was called. But like an example of the average round was, he tried to like give some kind of armor to the other guy, and instead made that guy magnetic, and all sorts of arrows and weapons like were redirected towards him with a extra accuracy. So there can be a point where you get, I guess, a little too out of control, where it was like he was a net negative.
Well, even I like there's a game that I've been playing with Mark where there's this mechanic around astrology, where astrologers have to try to divine the signs and connection of the person that they're going to try to influence, someone that they know well. And there's a good chance that they predict what's going to happen when they use astrology on that person, but they may completely get it wrong. And even if they did get it right, there's a 1 in 10 chance whenever they use the effect that it has an inverted effect and does the opposite of what you would expect.
Also, in that setting, the astrology class is considered to be trashed by most adventurers.
But it can't.
Just in world, it's like, yeah, don't bring an astrologer because what are they gonna do? It's random and it could be bad.
But they can also have some really powerful buffs. So I don't know. I think that kind of astrology idea. It's like, well, you know, you can essentially get haste as a really low level character. Or you can give someone level buff, which gives them like a +1 everything. But you also may just not have anything useful, or maybe that the only thing you can do for one of your party members that way is deal damage to them. So
you almost killed the main character.
I know my astrologer PC almost killed the main character, but the problem is that she's super affected by astrology, and that also means you can't correctly predict what's going to happen. So you might give her 4 turns per turn, or you might let her count as a vastly higher level character, or you might give her bonuses into the stratosphere so she gains other abilities, or you might almost kill her in 1 hit, depending upon what the random dice say. It's so fun.
Elftro says, Discworld is the scariest place to cast spells. Yeah, having in-game mechanics and world lore really match are important, and I feel like one of the coolest things in terms of Magic in Pathfinder 2nd Edition is having an official take on the essences and the sort of the types of magic really, really lays an underpinning for that magical metaphysics that makes it more meaningful to me.
I really like the scaling efficacy of spells in that system too, where it's like it's like a D10 based system, and if you roll 1, like you might with astrology you get kind of the inverse effect. With a lot of other things, like if you're a spellcaster, you just lose your ability to cast until you spend a while for basically for the rest of that combat, and waste your turn. But then like the higher you roll, once you hit the point where you're succeeding, you succeed by more and more. So you heal by more, you buff people for more rounds, etc., etc. So,
it's a random system I made up.
I like it. Are we gonna publish it someday? That'd be
cool. Maybe. People, I don't know how interested people are in random systems that are not like big systems. Indie RPGs, I think, don't necessarily have a big market. Let's see. Joker's talking about wizard schools mattering, each choice mattering, and not just being a grocery shopping list of parlor tricks. Yeah, it's very tricky because of the fact that a lot of players, and this is totally okay and reasonable, are pretty risk averse. Sometimes the risk aversion of players leads them to make decisions that are actually, if you allow them, are bad for the game, which you have to think about it and try to make a game that can allow players to be risk averse without making it bad for the game. But in the case of having Magic be very unreliable, there's a group of people who would want to play a wizard because they just think it's cool, but who are also risk averse enough that would make it so it was a non-starter for them. And so you have to be careful and talk to your group first before you do something like this. And I think there's a way you could do it, but almost like if we're going back to that you change rather than your spells being the ones that are changing, you could think of the schools of magic for the wizards. Wizards using arcane magic are sort of like almost scientists studying it. And when I think of scientists that go a little bit too deeply into their science, they sometimes scientists replace themselves with robot parts or whatever, right? So imagine if the wizard's mindset and almost like the essences within them get sort of replaced somewhat with a lot of stuff from that school. So are you an abjurer? Okay, well, and to make this a carrot and a stick, you might want to give some benefits too, and not just be like, there's a problem. It's like, maybe you're protected more all the time than most people, but you find it hard to attack people, and you find yourself sort of compelled towards protecting other people around you because the essence of protection sort of pervades in you. Or evokers who just they see someone building a Lego tower and they just want to blow it up.
Yep. Maybe their offensive magic is more effective, but perhaps it's harder to heal someone like that.
So any lore examples in Golarion of wizards who could get a healthy lesson in respecting their craft? Well, there's definitely like the Thessalonians went a little bit overboard with their schools of magic and the sort of sin/virtue that school represented, and this gave them some benefits but caused some problems to them as well as they so that actually could be a good example of like they went so deep in on necromancy, but it also caused them, because necromancy is all about life and taking everything in on life, but it has gluttony too, and all as well as sort of plenty and plentifulness and things like that. So they became extremely gluttonous, and you could use that as an example that's actually in canon of wizards that got a little bit overboard.
And then how all the virtues, each of the virtues twisted into a sin based on sort of that obsession of each.
Right.
Associated with each school.
That's right.
Except for divination.
Divination didn't have one, but like illusion, which brought greater confidence, which was a good thing, but then it led to delusional pride. So you can definitely play around with that if you want an in-canon example of wizards who went a bit too far with their school. All right. So let's see if anybody's...
says, but having an enchanter a necromancer's half zombie or an enchanter's body is replaced by a perfectionist mannequin parts is its own benefit, Mark. Well, it sounds like you would enjoy playing in a setting with those sorts of variants.
Yeah, maybe.
There was an overlord of divination. Why are they gone? They didn't see it coming.
There you go. Let's see. Do we have any other requests up here so far for talking about variants? So yeah, that's a great question Joker plays. It's actually it's a non-trivial variant to establish, and there's a lot of ways to go about it and to think about it. It's just very important to figure out what your theme and your feel is, and you know what it is. It's that magic is something important. It's not to be messed with. It's non-trivial. It's already powerful in Pathfinder, but it might seem like it's trivial or just some kind of app you can run and it'll just work. You know the theme you want. Once you know the theme you want, you try to find the mechanical and lore ways to latch onto that theme.
Yeah. I could also see, like, if the idea is that you can, for example, only use multi-class archetypes to get into spellcasting. So if you want to have, like, a reduced availability of magic and it's harder to get into it, it takes longer to get into it, and you can't have, like, as much potency of it.
That's right. Also, even just the story Joker told from Thieves' World about the guy who had something knocked back onto him and cursed to transmute, you can still tell players the story of that, even if that almost never happens to them, except for like during a special moment in the story, because their spells are more reliable. All right. Looks like Joker has got some really good ideas from this. That's awesome. Does anybody else have any variants they're interested in, variants they're curious about? Linda, I think we covered a lot of our variants pretty well.
Yeah, I think we did.
So far, although they did say in any system, but I don't feel like I've modded other systems that much. A lot of the other systems we played are a little more storytelling systems like anyway. That's a good example. It's more storytelling anyway, so it's like, do you really mod it that much, or are you just doing your own idiom within the storytelling system?
Yeah, exactly, right? Let's see. More variations on the Corruption Wizard line. High-level PCs beyond their ancestry. So rogues could become shadow-like fighters, grow tough hides. Clerics lose touch with their humanity and become close to their god. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, having a high-level character
system of being a high-level character is a corruption.
Be a corruption.
That's
of
cool.
Just like the high-levelness is in humanity. Is definitely something you could do.
It reminds me of like Mythender, where the more powerful you get, the closer to the gods you get, and your goal is to kill the gods, but you may well become a god in the process.
There we go. There's Ryan Macklin a second time in this one.
A question: if we mod
Starfinder? We haven't played it in a little while. We did a huge amount of Starfinder during the playtest. Just like, I was shocked how often our players who are around the world and remoting in. But we're one of the few groups that got the NDA for the Starfinder playtest, were willing to come during what was a fairly short playtest window with just the most dedicated playtesters. Like, they came 10 out of 14 days.
Yes.
Whoa. But since then, I haven't really played it that much, and it was where I didn't run it. It was usually like somebody at the office would run it, and we would use their rules, which were the standard rules.
Yeah, and I played some Starfinder Society as well, so that uses the mods that are on Society.
Yeah, Joe, I was shocked, but they had so much feedback, and the player of one of the players in particular had this giant ream of feedback that like huge percentages of it got in and made it a better game. And honestly, like, that was a big part of why the closed play test was successful. I was worried that without an open play test, a lot of things were done could get through, but them and a lot of the other closed play test people went so above and beyond. But like, any modding that I might do is probably very minor stuff, some of which, like, maybe will get errata, like enhanced resilience shouldn't give you full resistance against all 3 physicals or 1 non-physical, because it never was supposed to do that. It was supposed to give you 1 physical resistance, but then resistance got physical damage to be more like PF2 and easier to learn, got changed back to damage reduction pretty late on. And when it did, all the values got halved, but enhanced resilience didn't because of a mistake.
Yep.
So, like, basically any house rules there would just be, like, fixing those.
So there's a question, how about modding the PF2 economy? PFS provides an interesting example in the spell, scrolls, swords, providing consumables. Yeah, PFS generally has a higher baseline in terms of how much money it's assumed that you have, in part because unlike a static group, you don't have, like, a big wealth of party treasury that you're drawing from that you can share.
You're grouping with randos.
Yeah.
Randos who just do something weird could wind up, like, messing you up and knocking you behind if you just, like, fail and don't get any of the money but still get the XP, or a bunch of people get killed and have to pay to come back or something like that.
I mean, we expect, like, the character death is going to be really rare, particularly with hero points and things like that.
Sure,
but yeah, we do PFS2 Second Edition Pathfinder Society does give more money, and we sort of one of the things that we did is we sort of parceled aside and we looked at how much consumable value do we want to have people have, and it was something like 10%, I forget the exact number, like 10% of the total value of what they have is consumables that are granted out, that are parceled out at a 1 per adventure rate that then disappears after the fact. And that was in part because we also wanted to tell a story in which the society was providing more support for its agents and not just sending them out in the cold. And so that was a way, that's an example of the rules working together with the story with the lore to tell the story.
So here's another question from Joker Plays. What mechanics from other RPGs do we sometimes grab and use in our home games? I think we rarely grab mechanics from other RPGs as opposed to just brewing our own, although sometimes they turn out to be ones from other RPGs. The one I mentioned about negative con modifier staying conscious is from Arcana Unearthed, which is still a D20 system RPG, but is a different one than the one we were playing when we grabbed that mod. Let's see. An example Joker gives is the minion system of D&D 4E, which was never quite my cup of tea, but I see why people liked it. And it seems like one that's system neutral enough that you could use it anywhere if you like the minion system. And then Joker also mentions the game Autark has a kingdom and army management that could work for any game. And so subsystems are honestly a place where it's easier to go system neutral, especially if you're not throwing in, like, a type of check that, like, skill checks or something that are part of the game.
Yeah, well, like like operation checks in the Persona system. In War for the Crown. Like, you can, if the checks don't directly key into the PC's skills and abilities in the same way, but the checks instead key more into what they've built, like kingdom building rules, where it's like, oh yeah, you're making a stability check. What is stability based on? Stability is based on what you've built up over time with your
That's true.
kingdom.
And I think the only thing in the PF1 Kingmaker Kingdom Building that uses something from the game is that the ability score and the is it the ability score of it's just the ability score of each kingdom leader that's associated with their role is added to a modifier. Other than that, you could use those PF1 kingdom building rules in any game system.
Yeah. And honestly, in that system, modifiers go out of control by so much so quickly that the ability score doesn't necessarily matter unless you put in other modifications to make it matter more. But I guess with slight modifications, you can't. There's a lot of subsystems that you can drop in.
Yeah, I'm not saying that is a system that is balanced and good to use in any game. I'm just saying you could use it in other games. But have we though taken the
I don't think so. I think we tend to just build our own, and if we're playing a more indie game, we tend to just play it like as its own separate game. But
Stunt Monkey's having trouble getting people invested in the agent system and War for the Crown. In my group, they just liked raising up their different ranks, and then I would reveal like the new benefits of getting to this higher rank when somebody hit the first new rank of what it did, and I adjusted what the benefits were, and people were very happy about them, like getting a skill feat that's a level 1 skill feat from one of the associated skills at facet rank 5 in a facet, for example. That helped.
I'd say too the fact that we didn't just we weren't just like, I'm going to roll an X check to do Y. We'd always talk about like, why are we trying to do this? So if you're raising your heroism, then the player would talk about which of their heroic deeds that they've had recently they're going to be amping up and how.
Or the wizard would talk about which kind of lectures he was giving for his genius, possibly also to push the political agenda of the party.
And sort of by these descriptions, not only were we raising our stats, but whenever we were succeeding at those checks, it also was sort of implied to mean that we were succeeding in some of our larger social and political agendas. Or like if you're succeeding at your genius checks to show off your artwork, then it's talking about how you're gaining more followers to your school of thought.
Yep. Plus, my group spellcasters like the fact that they're genius folks, and I think sagacity folks could research spells as one of the things they would do, or try to find formulas to craft uncommon magic items for them. So they were like, "Ooh, yeah, right. I can have them go look for it instead of me." And did use some of the operation checks for that.
And I think certainly having more agents was more of an incentive once we got into it with the idea that it's like, oh, we could do this thing that's a little dangerous but is going to take a while, or we could send our agents to go lay the groundwork while we go investigate the thing we're most interested in doing.
Right. Just sort of like, look how much you can get done. Another thing that I found was important is that just generally to make sure that it's clear that when you send your agents, they're pretty unobtrusive to do something like scouting, so let people know, yeah, they're probably not going to get caught and killed unless you fail by a lot on this. So it's not, you can do all of these things and you can get more done.
And Joker says his advice is to look at what players you have. Some players care more about the numbers, so we'll use the optimization. Some care about the story, so reframe it in terms of what they're doing in a more narrative process. For them with roleplay if that's what they like.
Joker is absolutely right. Like in the setting that I was talking about before with the where the divine spells were near particular relics, one of our players, like, the elegance and exact combination of the way his character came together was the most important thing to him. So when he tried to like double deal with an Archduke of Hell, and he mostly succeeded, but not quite. And the one lingering remnant of the fact that he almost completely got out of that pact was the fact that he had a dead feat slot that used to be his disciple of the Archdevil feat that he was forced to take during that double deal. And that was like a motivating thing. He's like, I can't believe it. This is like having this feat slot that it doesn't have a feat in it is like the worst feeling of like a stain on my character. Like, because if I just told him you feel bad because Dark Devil things are in you with the story, not so much. Like, I already said that. But, like, that, he was like, I understand exactly what my character's feeling like, and then he became super motivated to, like, find a way to get that removed in the story, because he was like, this mechanical effect just allowed me to understand what was happening.
Yeah, and then that was an perfect example of knowing your player and tailoring. It was like, wow, that really feels like a consequence to the infernal effect.
It feels like the character is stained forever by this, by having this feat that doesn't do anything right now.
Mm-hmm.
Bye, everybody.